This interview is of Dale Allan Bryhan. It's being done on March the 2nd, 1996. The interviewer is Dr. Vernon L. Williams with the Department of History, Abilene Christian University. Mr. Bryhan, if you would, starting off, tell us a little bit about growing up in your family, where you were from, perhaps when you were born, a little bit about your parents, who they were, just to get us started.
Well, I was born on August the 24th, 1922, on a farm near Lancaster, Wisconsin, which is southwest of Lancaster. And let's see, my dad, he was a man that he was really upset because he didn't get into World War I, because of his family, they wouldn't draft him. If he'd been drafted, he'd have been thrown out again. But we had a farm, 120 acres, I believe. And I grew up on a farm, that is, until we moved the first time. Dad lost the farm in 28, I believe. And we moved subsequently to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different places, and ended up much later, another 3 or 4 years later, in Lancaster. My mother was tabbed to take care of her mother in Lancaster. Her mother was Victoria McDonald. Now, my dad's parents were alive. My grandmother, Bryhan, died in 1931, really quite young. I think she was 52. But my grandfather, he lived until in 44. I went to see him on furlough, and that's the last time I saw him, was when I was home on furlough before I went over to overseas.
What were your parents' names?
Dad was Elmer Christian Bryhan, and my mother was Alice Lulu McDonald, and Bryhan then. I had 6 brothers and 2 sisters, 5 brothers and 2 sisters, I'm sorry. There were 6 of us boys and 2 girls. And there was Elmer Jr. and Eldon and Evelyn, then myself, then Donald, and Gladys and Norman and Ralph. He was a baby. He is, I think, 13 years younger than myself. I don't know. That's about it as far as that part's concerned.
What about your life in Lancaster? Was that in the city? Did they still do farming?
No, not in Lancaster. When we moved to Lancaster, I was in the 2nd year of high school. Yeah. And high school, right across the street from my grandfather's, he called it his little farm. He had a full city block that he raised. He had, oh, you name it, it was there. He had real honest-to-goodness gooseberries that you just don't see like that anymore. And he had a large section of asparagus that he grew. He had really a kind of a small truck farm. It's no longer a farm. It's all been developed now, and there's houses all over. But it was a fine place to grow up, I'll tell you. But, oh, let's see. I don't know what else you'd like there, but...
What year did you graduate from high school?
1939. And after high school, I was kind of hung up. I had maybe an opportunity to go to West Point. My dad said he could probably get me an appointment, but then when he tried to, somebody else had gotten it already, so I missed out on that. And we didn't have the money to go. I didn't have the money to go to college. No way. Now, my oldest brother went to the University of Wisconsin Extension in agriculture, and he went 2 terms up there. But other than that, my older sister, she went to the Platteville State Teachers College, which is now, they've combined the old Platteville Mining School, that put the 2 of them together, and they incorporated them in the University of when she finished there, she wrote a test and finished. That's 2 years. She wrote a test and got her teacher's certificate, and she went to teaching. You can't do that anymore. But that she taught, actually, she taught 2 years before I went into the service, and she married a man who had been, I guess he was drafted, but I'm never sure, Glenn Bertram. And I went to their wedding. I was living in Rockford then, working, and I went home to their wedding. And it was later that same year that I got my greetings. So, I don't know, it was I had a really interesting, well-rounded background. The year after I got out of high school, a summer at least, I worked for a farmer on a farm and did general farm work. And I don't know, it was nice.
Where were you working when you got the greetings?
I was living in Rockford. When I went to Rockford first, I got a job at a furniture factory, and I was a stainer. I would apply the stain to the woods that didn't really look like the wood is supposed to look like. And anyway, I worked there for 6 months, and then I heard about I got a job at the J.I. Case Company. I was in the parts department there. It was a good job. I liked it. And but when I was drafted, I was making 86 cents an hour, which was top of the line for hourly labor then. And actually, right after the day after Pearl Harbor, I went down to the Marine Corps. Now all of this is in that literature that I sent you before, but the Marine Corps wouldn't have me because they said I was colorblind. And I tried. They told me to try back in 3 months, and in 3 months, and I did twice, and it didn't work. And so I said, well, I'm just going to wait till I'm drafted, which I got my greetings about a week after I was 20. And I went into Fort Sheridan, had my final physical exam, and the fellow that gave me my shots was a fellow that was 2 years ahead of me in high school, named Jim Yidey, and he'd gone to medical school in Chicago somewhere, I don't remember, but he was interning at Fort Sheridan for his doctorate. But then we got sworn in and everything, and they sent us home for, I don't know, a couple of weeks, and for Christmas, and we reported back a day or so after Christmas, and everybody got on a train and ended up in Camp Wallace, Texas, which is not on the island, but it's real near Galveston. It's just
Camp what?
Camp Wallace. Later on, that camp was turned into a Navy camp. During the war yet, it was turned into a Navy camp encampment. But while at Wallace, it was, I took my boot, or my basic training, and on I guess it was about the 3rd week, I caught a cold. It settled in my throat, and they took me to the hospital and took my tonsils out. And I got up in the night, and on the way back to bed, I passed out on the floor, and that's where they found me, in a pool of blood. They had to give me a whole bunch of blood and put me back to bed, and I was in the hospital for 2 weeks after that. And I did get to meet a celebrity. Roy Rogers and Trigger came. And Trigger just came that close to kicking me. He missed. But that was the only celebrity I ever saw all the time I was in the Army. Never saw any of those. We heard about, celebrities going to be here or there, but we never ever saw them. It was kind of strange.
Roy Rogers.
Yeah.
Well, what happened after you got out of the hospital?
I went back, and they gave me a choice of picking up basic where I was or staying out and starting with the next group that came in. And I didn't ask them any particular details. And I said, well, shoot, sorry with you, I'll just pick up. And the next day they had a 20-mile hike with full field pack. That was great. But I made it. In fact, I made it, and I was carrying a couple of extra rifles and another pack. And they thought I was crazy. Of course, I was just an old farm boy, you know. Oh. But, oh, and one thing more, during basic there, after basic, they just shoved me here and there. We went to a big deal at a building. We were supposed to have some kind of test. The fellow that was passing out the pencils was Melvin Douglas, old movie star. He was a PFC. 2 weeks later, he was a first lieutenant fellow in the entertainment group or whatever they call it. Oh, no. The other thing we got to do, we went into Galveston. They rode us in there on trucks. And we got to be in the San Jacinto Day Parade. We didn't even know what San Jacinto Day was. We found out. Oh, we had a good time.
That was during basic training?
It was right after basic. Well, actually, it was quite a while after basic, because San Jacinto Day is in February, or April, rather. Today, by the way, is Texas Independence Day, you know. And actually, after basic, they just didn't have much to do with me, and I went over to OCS Preparatory, and I was there for 3 weeks. It was supposed to be a 4-week deal, and then off to Camp Davis in North Carolina. And I was there for about 3 weeks, and then word came down, and they busted up OCS with anti-aircraft, and they gave us a choice of going to Bliss in the infantry OCS or go to college. And I always wanted to go to college, so let's go to college. That's how I got to go to A&M.
So you took a test, or you didn't have to take?
Now that test, that was to find out what you were best suited for, and that's one of the reasons I guess I went to OCS. But the other reason, of course, was the test we took at Sheridan, which was the what do they call it, to measure your aptitude.
Aptitude test.
Yeah. And I ranked high enough, I guess, to get into the OCS Preparatory. And then that school for quartermaster supply, that really didn't amount to much. A couple of weeks was all, and I got a piece of paper saying I'd passed and all. And then we didn't do very much at all after basic training was completely done.
It's sort of like they didn't know what to do with it?
That's right. They didn't really know what to do. And not just me, but there were quite a group of us in the same boat.
How many of that group went to College Station with you? Any?
Oh, I don't really remember exactly, but I know there was more than just myself. I think there were about 8 of us, and right now I can't tell you names. I don't remember them.
Well, when you get to College Station, what do you find there? Could you describe the campus, the barracks, and the arrangements? What happens to you when you first get there?
Well, they met us at the train, and we had to take our duffel bags and walk over to what now they call the new dorm area. Have you ever been on the campus? I don't know whether it's called the new dorm area now, but it's down by Duncan Hall, where the big mess hall is, a big mess hall. And I lived in dorm 9 the first term, and we moved, after every term we moved to a different dorm, and I don't remember. I was in 11 also once, and then the last term we were at Leggett Hall, which was right across the street from Spisa Hall, which that was fun. You know, you walk up about 4 steps, and then you walk in and go down, and we lived in the basement, myself and a whole group of us. And by group, I mean they had us set up by section. A section was the amount that they wanted for a class. It was somewhere between 25 and 30 men, and that was a class. And we had to march to class. In fact, I have a picture or two. I don't know who took them, but they are at A&M while we were there, and we were marching to class.
Were those barracks that you lived in first, were those red brick?
No, they were lighter colored brick. the new dorm area. The red brick is over at what is now, I guess, the new dorm area. That was all red brick, and the athletic dorms were brick. You know, that. One of our dorm masters, when I was there, and I think it was during the service, but he was a football player, and it was his, I guess, job to, he was a dorm master. It was a 4-story building, and I've forgotten how many rooms, but he had to inspect everything every day. And of course, if you got a gig, you ended up on some detail.
Well, tell me a little bit about the curriculum there. What kinds of things did you do? Of course, the A&M was all male at that time.
Sure was.
But how did you sort of factor in with the rest of the student population? Were you isolated, segregated, what?
Yes, to a large degree. I never did know any civilian students while I was there. I don't know particularly why. Now, at A&M, they had advanced ASTP and ASTP and the Navy V-12 program. All of them were there. The V-12 group, they were in the 2 dorms across the area away from us, and they were 2 dorms that were very close to Duncan Hall. Then the advanced, they were up by the North Gate somewhere. I don't remember exactly where they lived, but they were people that had 2 years of college prior to being inducted into the service.
And so they were taking basically junior and senior level courses?
That's right. And most of us there were taking basic engineering. Well, of course, we had chemistry and math, starting with, I suppose, I can't remember exactly, but I think we had algebra and trigonometry, and that the last term I was there, I know I had surveying, because I remember running a level from the South Gate to the academic building, and my roommate was my partner, and we come in and we had to tell our answer, and we were within 15,000 of an inch of the actual true answer. And I mean, we ran that dead run because we wanted to catch a train to go to Houston. We had a lot of fun there, really. After classes, classes usually were over 2:30 or 3, and there was formal calisthenics for 30 minutes, and it followed that by a 1.7-mile run, and then we were turned loose and we'd go swimming or play handball or anything else, but we had to last for a full 2 hours. And so we kept pretty good in shape, and then on the way back to the dorm room, we always stopped at the ship store and got a pint of ice cream and ate it each one. It's a good way to keep your weight, you know.
Do you remember any of the fellows or instructors that, back in those days at A&M that sort of stand out in your mind?
Well, yeah, there was one teacher in chemistry, and I've forgotten whether it was qualitative or quantitative. I think it was qualitative. His name was Harter, last name. I don't remember his first name. But, of course, to us it was Mr. Harter anyway. But he talked like he had marbles in his mouth, always. Unless you were on the front row, you could not understand what he said. There was no way. The only thing you could do to pass his course is to really study, you know, outside. And you know, after I went back to A&M, 2 years after the war, he was still there and he remembered me.
And you remembered him?
Oh, you bet. Yeah, and another one was, he was a high school principal from Bryhan, named Carmichael, William Carmichael. They called him Bill. He taught us, the one time I had him, he taught trigonometry. And one of our trig classes happened to be on Saturday morning. And I think it was a 9 o'clock class. But anyway, after about 30 minutes, and he wouldn't dare do this now, but he'd say, my hair is sure getting kinky. He says, it must be time to go fishing. And he'd say, you're all free. He wanted to go fishing. I saw him one time, several years later. He was superintendent of schools in Bryhan then. He didn't remember me per se, but after we got talking, he remembered. But outside of that, of course, there's a lot of the boys. There were two boys that lived in this Leggett Hall the last term. That they had a photograph player that their parents had set down or something, one of their parents. And one of them was Beardsley, and I don't remember the other boy's name. But they had a stack of records like that, you know, all 78s. And they would put in the groove, or in the mood rather, on the turntable, open the window wide, and when the bugler first started, they'd turn that thing on and let it go. Everybody knew them. Because you could hear that for blocks. And they thought it was better than the bugle call.
How did you find out about, well, let me back up a minute and ask you about just how far along in the curriculum, semesters-wise, did you get through before the program was
We had
shut
3
down?
terms there. The first term, about a month before we finished the first term, they said that everybody that had a real good grade, B or above, would get a 30-day furlough. Actually, I think it was 28, but anyway, I did. I went home for a month, and that's all I could afford anyway. But that was because the powers that be wanted to get all of the AST schools on the same time schedule. And so we got a time off.
What happened to the guys that didn't have the B average?
They stayed there and took tests again, and one guy didn't get any vacation. In fact, he busted out. I couldn't really figure out why he did, because he always had, in fact, he was my roommate to start with, and I'm not real sure why he wasn't my roommate when I went off on furlough, but he was, in fact, he was gone when I got back. And his name was Russell Burley. I still remember him. He looked about like his last name sounded, a burly sort of guy. Good football player, but he didn't have it between the ears somehow. But he was a heck of a nice guy. I don't remember where he was from either.
Well, in the third term, how were you notified that the program was shutting down?
Well, they told us that right after Reveille, that there was the day after the last day of class, that was it. There'd be no more classes. We'd heard rumors, but we didn't know anything for positive. And then we, of course, so the rumors all had us going, you know, to a replacement depot and replace line troops over in Europe or in the South Pacific. It was, the rumors were scary. And those are the kind that usually were true.
Yeah.
But it turned out that we got on a train, and then they told us where we were going. They didn't tell us ahead of time. And then we didn't know where we were going until we got it. Well, no, they told us where we were going. They said Camp Barkley, and none of us knew where Camp Barkley was. But, oh well, then we got off the train at Barkley and went into a large building, and the walls were lined with tables, and guidon at each table. A representative from each battalion was at the tables. And I had, somehow or other, the rumors just flew terrible in the service. And I had heard that they wanted somebody in company supply and A company of ordnance. And I thought, boy, that's for me. So I made a beeline and talked my way into the job, which was good.
Remember who you talked to that day? Who the officer was?
I think it was Lieutenant Emerson, who was at that time the executive officer. I don't know that positively, but I think it was, of A Company even. No, they were there for representing the entire battalion, but there were, I think, 4 or 5 officers there. But I talked to him. And he apparently had the authority to say the job is filled to me, and that was it. I mean, I got the job.
What kind of things did he ask you?
My background, and I says, well, do you have my record? And he looked at a bunch of papers. He found it. And I says, what is my classification? Well, what do you know? He says, quartermaster supply. Because I'd been to school, you know. And he found that out, and so that was all there was to it. I got the job right there. There really wasn't much questioning. In fact, now when I got into A Company the morning after we got settled in, were you ever out at Camp Barkley before they tore down the buildings? Oh, now those were a surprising shock.
Well, we've got lots of photographs of it.
Those hutments.
We've done a lot of work out there.
You know, they wouldn't keep dust out. Dust would go right through the walls. And of course the wind does blow. Oh, golly. But anyway, the morning after I'd settled in, I got called into the CP, I guess. They call it a CP. And Captain O'Connor interviewed me. He was a company commander. And he's the one that told me I had 2 strikes on me already. First, because you wasn't a harvester man, and second, because you worked for a competitor.
So he was part of the International Harvester.
Yes, he had worked for a harvester truck dealer in St. Louis. And he was a reserve officer anyhow. I don't know I don't remember where he went to school, but he was in, it's like A&M, the Corps now. But anyway, he got to become a reserve officer there, that way.
What else do you remember about that conversation, that interview?
Oh, he asked me pretty much the same sort of things that you've been asking about my background and my parents and all this and that. And most of the information he already had because of my service record. But he asked again, I don't know, he just did.
So what happens next?
Well, he took me over and introduced me to Sergeant Price, who was he was a staff sergeant, old harvester man too. Oh, by the way, did you know that if you were working at Harvester, was part of the original Harvester Battalion, you went into the Army, and about 2 weeks later, you were given your ultimate stripes. Some of those guys, 2 weeks later, they were tech sergeants, master sergeants, and they hadn't even had basic training. Some of them really, because of their stripes, rank, they didn't ever have to have basic training. I thought that was a strange way to do business, but they did it. Oh.
So they were actually in those ranks when you arrived?
Oh, yes. See, this was in 44 when I got there, and the battalion was formed in late 42. And they had been, I think it was formed at Camp Perry, Ohio, and then they went to Campbell in Kentucky, and from Campbell they went over here to Barkley.
About when did you arrive in 44 at Barkley?
I think it was April.
Okay. Well, what did the
April.
sergeant have you do?
Pardon?
What did the sergeant have you do?
Well, the heck of it was, Captain O'Connor brought me in there and introduced me, and he says, now, Herb, he says, this guy is going to teach you everything you haven't learned yet. The captain left, Herb said, what in the hell did he mean by that? And I said, well, I don't know. Well, what do you, that's a hot shot, what did you do? And I said, well, I went to school in company supply. Oh, well, maybe you can help.
What was the situation with supply?
Well, it was kind of like O'Connor thought. Herb really didn't know what he was doing. But between the two of us, we got it all worked out. He had trouble with forms. And, you know, in the service, you have a form for everything. A Form 32 and a Form 64. And they said, oh, Lord. He had trouble trying to remember what form was for what. And, of course, in school, I had learned all that. It was almost second nature. Well, it was, we did get along fine. Now, Herb had his own choice of who he wanted for a clerk. A young fellow named Jock Sutherland. That was his actual name, J-O-C-K. He was a little youngster from near Boston somewhere. And he was always hanging around supply room, wanting to be in the supply room, but he hadn't been to school for anything. Herb would have had to teach him everything. And finally, I mentioned it to, just off the cuff, to one of the officers. It was a Lieutenant Murphy, who was a fine man. He and I get along great. We correspond.
What was his first name?
Howard. Yeah. Well, anyway, Howard put the bug in the captain's ear, and the captain made it go back down, and Sutherland became a peep driver. And you know, we did not call them Jeeps. They were peep. The official nomenclature for that vehicle is peep. The Jeep was what everybody called, or we called, the command car. If you ever have seen a command car, it was a two-seated vehicle, usually open without a top on it, and they didn't have doors that opened or closed, you stepped in. But anyway, that was the officially designated Jeep. But everybody, shoot, even we toward the end of the war got to calling them Jeeps because everybody else did, the other branches of the service. But he was a Jeep driver, or a peep driver for the captain, which was a good job.
What were you all doing there at Barclay in terms of training and?
Well, after they went through our records, we had to, the group of us that came in with ASTP, we had to go and qualify we had to do everything that was necessary to become part of an armored division. The things we hadn't qualified for, we had to qualify. We had to take the obstacle course. We didn't have any obstacle course down at Barclay, or at Galveston. And we had to learn we qualified with the grease gun, which is a submachine gun, not a Thompson. We qualified on a Thompson as well. And when I fired for record at Galveston, all we had was the 30-03, the old 1903 model, I guess it was called. And so I had to qualify on the Garand, or Garand, I'm not really sure how they pronounce it anymore. And we, let's see, we had to qualify on both the 50 and the 30 caliber machine guns. And we didn't have to take any hikes because we'd already had more hiking than the 12th needed. But I don't know, there was that sort of thing. And after about the time we finished qualification, I know I was coming back I'd been to Houston I went down Friday night and was coming back Sunday night, and I found out we stopped in Temple and some guy got on board, and that's how I learned about D-Day. And when we got back to camp, boy, the rumors were really flying. We were going to leave right away, but we didn't leave for a while. In fact, I had another furlough before we left. But it was all in all, I kind of enjoyed life at Barclay and in the 12th when I first got there. And we ultimately got on trains. I guess all of us got on, our company at least. In fact, most of the battalion got on one train. And they were old rolling stock, if you will. I mean, some of them were wooden and you could see through the walls.
You're talking about the train going to Camp Shanks?
Yeah, the train car. And we didn't know where we were going.
Well, let's back up before we get to that point. One of the problems we're having out at Camp Barclay, we're trying to do some archaeology out there.
Mm-hmm.
And we have located the 12th Armored Division area. I'd like you to see if you can try to remember in your mind the layout of the 134th area. For example, where were the mechanical motor pool area versus the living area in the company headquarters, battalion headquarters? Was that all together in one big thing? Was it?
It was not in a squared, no. But I can remember that right next to the hutment I lived in, and I think there were 40 men in there, I'm not sure. Right across the street, if you will, or alley or whatever, there was a group of engineers. And beyond them was the 92nd Reconnaissance Group. So we must have been on the fringe of the maintenance battalion. And I say we, at least a company, must have been on the, I would say, the southeast fringe of the battalion. I'm sure that going the other way, in fact, as I got to know that B Company was not too far away. I didn't know anybody in B Company. Later I got to learned to know a couple of people, and C Company was to the left behind them, and then to the west of us, I believe, was headquarters company. There was no D Company, it was just A, B, and C and headquarters.
Now, what about...
And we, I believe, were on the east side of the large open areaway at Barclay. That was the big parade ground. I think we were on the east side, maybe in about the middle. I don't know exactly. Now, I know our trucks and that equipment was all to the east beyond us in a big motor pool. There were lots of vehicles there. All of the companies parked their vehicles in the same general place.
If you came into camp and you entered at Pershing Boulevard there, out at the gate there's that big sort of sign that says Camp Barclay.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a guard post there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a two-road, a concrete road, but it's a...
two-lane.
Actually, it's 2 lanes on one side going one way in, and 2 lanes coming out of the post, separated by a grassy area, and the big water towers are in the middle there, down the road. If you entered the camp and you were going down Pershing Boulevard, and you go across the parade ground, which you can see on either side of you, is your area going to, are you going to turn to the right there when you get past the parade ground?
No, we would turn to the left, because we were coming in from the north and going south when we come in. So we would turn to the left to get to the 134th. That's the way I remember it.
Well, did you...
Now, I don't remember any other division being there when I was. Now, there may have been, but we weren't. We were kept pretty darn busy while we were there. In fact, we went down to Hood on mini maneuvers one time.
I believe the medical people will be the only ones there while you all are there. The 11th Armored probably is already gone, and the 45th and 90th Division came before that.
So I had some dental work done there, but I don't remember exactly where I went.
Well, that helps. You're the first person who has placed any 12th Armored Division hutments or company areas or anything on the left side of that.
Is that right?
Yeah. And it's not that it's not there. We just don't have hardly anyone that even remembers the road going in there.
Do you remember where the laundry was?
No.
Well, it was on the far south side of Camp Barclay. And I know I went down, I don't know why, but I went to the laundry a couple of times, and like I say, I don't know exactly. Maybe it was when I was getting my driver's license for the truck, because as company supply clerk, my job was going to be the driver of the supply truck as well. But anyway, and I remember that there was German POWs that worked in the laundry, a lot of them, because they had a POW camp right there on the camp, on the base.
The ruins are still there, the foundation.
Oh, is that right?
POW camp. Anything else you can remember that might be helpful to us in terms of, what about the battalion headquarters area? What did that building look like, and where was it in relation to where you stayed?
Now, I think this is kind of dim, because I've never, but I believe that battalion headquarters building was a permanent building. I say permanent. Now, Camp Barclay itself was a brand new camp at the beginning of the war. It never did become a fort, did it? I didn't think so. I think they started tearing that down about 2 or 3 years after the war, didn't they?
Well, in '46, they're letting bids out to sell the buildings.
That's right. That's what I was thinking. But I still think that it was a wooden, semi at least, permanent building, and it was, I think, a 2-story building, as best I can recall. I know that this large building that when we got there and got off the train and were trucked out there, and we did our interview to see where our assignment was going to be, that was on the west side of the camp. I know that, or almost positive. That was on the west side of the camp, and it was also a semi-permanent structure, but it seemed like, I don't remember it being 2 stories, but it was a rather large, inside the building, it was a rather large area around which they had tables set up, you know, with a guide on it identifying what.
Could it have been a service club?
It might have been a service club. Now, I don't remember ever going to the service club as a USO sort of thing while I was at Barclay, mostly because I was too tired. Boy, they kept us on the dead run.
The train you came in on, was it out there on the edge of Barclay, or was that in town?
Well, I think we got off in town, and their trucks met us and drove us out there. Okay. That's my recollection. But I know when we boarded the train, when we left, it was on, there was a siding there, and we got on the train right there at Barclay.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Anything else you remember about maybe any other people you encountered, officers that made an impression on you, anything like that while at Barclay?
Well, let's see.
Did you know Colonel McMenamin?
No, as a matter of fact, I didn't know him until after the war, when I started going to reunions. He and I are pretty close friends now, but I didn't know him then. He was in headquarters all of the time. He was in battalion headquarters.
Well, what about, I imagine because of your battalion being a maintenance battalion, the word to pack up meant a lot of work for you. What happened then?
Well, in supply room, it meant we had to pack up everything we had. And when we went overseas, let me think now, I think we put that in canvas, double wrapped in canvas, and we put it in the truck and put the tarp over the back of the truck, and it went with the truck because we were going to get those trucks back again when we got to wherever we were going. And we did. We got them back at Tidsworth in England. But that was, Herb and I worked hard to get it packed up. Oh, boy. Because we had an awful lot of stuff, you know, not more than just your personal stuff. We had all of the clothing that we carried with us and, you know, that kind of thing.
Anything, any special instructions?
Well, I don't remember precisely whether there were any special instructions.
Oh, what happened once you get that done? In other words, the loading on the train and going to New York. What was that trip like for you?
That was, those cars were so terrible. It was a real chore to get any sleep because they were just rougher than a cob. Oh, God. But I do remember, of course, we had all kinds of rumors, like I say, but we knew we were going generally in a northeasterly direction. And one guy says we're going to Shenango, which was in Pennsylvania, but that was by the boards for long. And then we never even heard of Camp Shanks. I didn't even know what Camp Shanks was, but it was really quite a ride.
Now you said that.
But we did go through West Point on the way.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yes, we went through West Point. So we always can say we went to West Point.
You said that the 134th pretty well stuck together on the train. How was that laid out? Was the whole battalion in the same car?
I believe the whole battalion was on board that train. Now, of course, the capacity of a car was not even a company, but it was a long train. It must have had 25 or maybe even as many as 50 cars on it. It was a long train, that much I remember. Now, of course, there was an advanced detachment that left Camp Barkley almost a month ahead of us.
Did 134 send anybody with
Oh,
them?
yes. Yeah. But minimum was one that went. And I've forgotten, well, let's see. There was a tank transporter driver, I know that went. He and his assistant and the vehicle. And let me think, a wrecker and its crew was on the advanced detachment. And it seemed like there was a representative from each of the main entities of our company. Like we had the small arms section and the, of course, the maintenance shop section and the artillery section and that kind of thing. I think a representative from each of those went on that advanced detachment. But I'm not real sure because I truthfully, I was gone on furlough when they left, and I didn't really know they had gone until, I don't know, until we were about ready to leave ourselves. All of a sudden I said one day, oh, where the heck is Sergeant Houck? I haven't seen him for a long time. Oh, he left. But he says, I don't know where he went. This other guy, because I think it was kind of on the QT, and nobody revealed any information. I found out later.
What happens when you get to Camp Shanks?
Very little. Let's see. We got to Shanks, and we were given a billet, and then they says, anybody want to go to New York City? And of course, everybody wanted to go to New York City. They'd never been, most of them. Of course, I had some friends that lived in New York City, but I know Herb and I went in at the same time. I can still remember. We were standing right on Times Square, leaning against the Times building. And Herb says to me, wonder where this Times Square everybody talks about is. That was so funny, I thought I'd fall down. I took him out to the edge of the sidewalk and pointed up. And there was a sign going along. It was really funny.
So you guys painted the town red.
Oh, yes. We ended up, a group of us, I don't know, 4 or 5, in one of these diamond dance places, which I'd read about. I'd never seen one, and certainly had never been in one. But we took a train we crossed the Hudson at Weehawken Ferry, got on the train and went to Shanks that way. Now, you know, I wouldn't be able to tell you where Camp Shanks was today if I had to. I know it was north of New York, but that's all.
Tell me a little bit about embarking.
Oh, that was a fun. We took a train down, crossed on the ferry, and I guess we were trucked down to the dock area on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and there was this great, big, tremendous steamship. And they had a gangplank that were, as wide as this room. You could walk up that 8 abreast easily, but carrying your duffel bag and all of the rest of your gear, it wasn't easy. It was like going uphill. But that was fun. And I can still remember we went on board this ship. It was an Empress of Australia. It was we'd been given to the British as reparations from Germany after World War I. It was really still in pretty good shape. But I was kind of lucky. In fact, I was very lucky. I was billeted on the promenade deck, and that was nice, relatively. Now, some of the officers were billeted on promenade also, but they had the staterooms. We didn't have staterooms. We had hammocks that were temporarily put up for this, and they converted into a troop carrier. But I can still remember Ottoby Knox. He was from up in the Panhandle somewhere. They had him assigned on E deck, way down below the waterline. All you had to do was turn around and he was back up on the promenade deck with somebody's bunk. He didn't want any part of being down below the water. Oh, Ottoby, I hadn't thought of him in a long time.
Any of these people active in the association?
No, I've never seen Audeby at a reunion. And every reunion, there's always a first-timer. And somebody that you haven't seen for 50 years.
In the 134th, you mean?
Oh, sure, sure. I remember in, let's see, it was about 15 years ago, maybe 16, we went to Louisville. And that was the first reunion that John Casella had been to. He worked for McNall, who was head of the repair section for the company vehicles. He had to take care of the company vehicles. Now, Casella worked for him. Anyway, I saw Casella on the stairs at the hotel, and we got to chatting and whatnot, and he says, is anybody there here I know? And I said, oh, yeah. I says, McNall's here. McNall? Oh, good. He said, I got to go find a J.I.K.'s cap and give it to him. Oh, darn. Oh, shoot. But Casella got so, they made every reunion for a number of years, and then they missed one. We've missed a couple since then, too, but not many. My first reunion, though, was in Chicago, 2 years after. The very first one was New York City. I didn't go to that, didn't even know they had it. But I found out about the Chicago reunion, and I was going to school at Platteville Mining School then. And I went. There was no way to keep me from going. It was a good time.
Well, what happens when, well, I guess we need to know a little bit about the voyage.
Well,
how did you fare on that? How long a voyage was it?
Actually, when you get right down to it, it was pretty dull because you couldn't go out on deck much during the daylight hours for fear a German plane might be flying over. On this side of the Atlantic, it wasn't too bad because there wasn't much fear of a German plane flying over, but submarines were always a scare. And I'm not real sure, but it seemed like we had 5 destroyers that went weaved in and out of the entire convoy. But, oh, there was always all kinds of card games and crap games. Oh, my Lord. Fella I knew from New York City, Vigiano was his last name, and right now I can't say his first name, but he was he was a gambler. Oh, he started with a $5 bill and made 16 straight passes and left the whole thing right. And you can imagine what 5 to the 16th power is, but that's how much money was laying on the deck. All in greenbacks. And then he crapped out. He said, what the heck, it only cost me $5.
Very philosophical.
Philosophical is right. And he'd been a longshoreman, a stevedore. Spent his time on the docks. He was from Brooklyn. What was his first name? I don't remember.
What happens when you get to England?
Well, everything that happened when we went on board happened only in reverse. Instead of going down a gangplank, we went up again. And the gangplank was even wider. And when we got to the top, we were at a railroad station platform, and we got on a train.
Where was this?
At Liverpool. And we didn't know where we were going. And it was like a toy train to us because their trains are, then at least, real tiny little things. Shoot, one car would probably hold 30 or 40 people at most. You know, you loaded right from the outside, and there's 3 people to a compartment. Only I think we doubled up, or nearly doubled up, because we all had our duffel bags and our full field pack and everything. I don't believe we had our rifles, though. I think they stayed with the trucks. I don't think we were allowed to carry our rifles. I don't remember, truly. You might find out from somebody else because they probably remember. I don't. Never thought about it. What did we do with our rifles? But we got on this train, and they have the funniest little whistle. It's a kind of a tweet, you know. But we went rolling down through the countryside, and I think about 24 hours later we got to now they got it spelled in a book as Tidworth Barracks, but I think it was T-I-D-S Worth Barracks. I don't know. It just seemed like it was. Which was down about, maybe 10 miles north of Salisbury, on the Salisbury Plain we were. And I didn't know it then, but the Stonehenge was only about 5 miles from where we were, and I didn't even, nobody even mentioned it when we were there, and I sure wanted to see that.
Never went back to see it, huh?
Pardon?
Never went back to see it?
Never have had an opportunity to go back and see it. Would have been fun, still would be fun. Except that they got it fenced in now. You can't go up and touch the rocks like you could then. But that would have been nice. But I remember going into Salisbury. That is quite a cathedral there. You know, the building of that cathedral is part of a fiction story. What the dickens is the name of that? The real thick book. I think Missioner wrote it, but I'm not sure. No, it's kind of like his writing, but shoot. But anyway, it's a very interesting and well-researched book because it told how those stonemasons worked. They don't, shoot, all the rocks fit together. They did nothing to prop them into place. They fit. And that thing is still standing. They built things to last in those days. Yeah, they actually dug to bedrock. And in some places they had to dig 100 feet to get their footings. And you know, digging in those days was something else. No, that always fascinated me, that story, and I can't remember what it was called.
What did the battalion do at Tidsworth?
Well, actually, let me think now. We had a little to do, but it was very little. Just, you know, make-work busyness. And I managed to get a pass. I had a brother-in-law that was in the 8th Air Force in East Anglia. And I managed to get a pass, 5 day or 6 day, anyway. I went out to see him. And I had a good time. I got a train out of London, had bought a ticket for Bungay, which is where he was. Only they didn't tell me I had to change at Ipswich. They figured I could read the ticket. But anyway, I didn't, and I ended up in Great Yarmouth, which I forgot, it's probably about 40 miles from Bungay. But I spent the night at an all-forces club there at the conductor's suggestion because he thought that was the place to go. And that was like an American USO. It was called an all-forces club. And I went in there and asked at the desk if there was availability of a place to stay overnight. And she looked at the list and she gave me a name and directions. It's not far, about 4 squares. You can't miss it, you know. And then she says, now you be sure and come back, we're having a special program. And I said, well, if I can, I will. And went on and spent the night at these people's house. They had lost a son in North Africa. He was with Montgomery down there, and I don't know exactly. They never did get notification that he'd been killed in action, but they hadn't seen him since 41, I think it was. So apparently he was no more. But anyway, I went back to the club, and turned out I was part of the program. I was the only Yank in the whole darn building. They had Poles and Swedes and everybody else there, you know, and English and French, but no other Americans, and I was it. So I had to get up and speak a few words. Not much, but I spoke a few words. Next day I went out to Air Force Base and found my brother-in-law. He didn't know I was coming because I didn't write to him. There was no way to use the phone. And he had just gotten back a couple of days previous from a pass to Scotland, but he managed to get another pass, and we went into Norwich. That was something. I tell you, it was market day. The farmers there, they bring all of their livestock on foot into town. Chickens with strings on their legs and turkeys and all that. It was something else. And cattle, oh gosh. And I never will forget that. I even saw later on that afternoon, I saw a buzz bomb. I had never seen one before. My brother-in-law, he'd seen a lot of them, and he told me what it was. And it just, I'm sure glad it kept on going. But going back, I didn't have any trouble at all. I got on the train at Bungay, and I remembered to change at Ipswich and got to London, no problem. And I went to the movies after I got to London because it was too early to get back to camp. Didn't want to do back till midnight. It was shortly after lunchtime. Oh, yeah.
Well, how long after this did you begin the movement to France?
Well, let's see. We got to England in September, and it was in late September that we crossed the channel. Now, we went across the channel on LST, speaking for myself and part of my company, and I liked that LST, but it was rough. It seemed like everybody on that darn boat got seasick on the way over the channel. We went up the Seine River as far as Offay, which is, we went on up the river to Rouen, R-O-W-E-N, all the way up there. And we got off at Rouen, and, we had gotten our trucks there at Tidsworth shortly before we left, and we drove them in what they called open convoy. We were not close together, closed up. We were probably a quarter of a mile apart, our vehicles. Huh. And that's because the Krauts had airplanes flying over, and for surveillance, they could spot a convoy, especially if they were closed up. But we went open convoy. In fact, sometimes we were 2 and 3 miles behind the truck ahead of us. But that was a new experience for us, all of us.
Well, what happens when you get to France?
We got off the ship, on the LST. Herb and I swiped a stretcher apiece because they fit right across the back of a 2.5 or 6.5 ton, or what is it, 2.5, 4x6 they call them. And they fit across there, and we had our bedroom right with us all the time. We didn't have to be billeted out in the cold or anything. Of course, we had plenty of blankets, you know. But anyway, we got off, and we went in convoy across France toward the east, and it was continuous. I don't believe, except minor maintenance stops, I don't believe we stopped all the way across France. And we got to Epinal, which is where we were kind of a staging area. Got the rest of the company and the rest of the vehicles all showed up. And then, let me see, while we were at Epinal, that's where I had my experience with meeting the general.
Tell us about that.
That was fun. Well, see, before we left Barclay, Herb and I had been trying to get the company up to strength, so to speak, with their clothing and that. And there were about 10 or 12 boys whose shoes were so badly worn, it was terrible. And by the time we got to Epinal, they were literally, some of them, walking on their uppers. They didn't have shoes. And Herb, he says, that one morning, he says, Dale, you go and find some shoes for those boys, and don't come back without them. So I got directions to headquarters, and I figured I'd go to see S4, old Sergeant Shoemate. You know, old rascal, he wasn't worth powder to boil on. Well, I didn't mean it that I never was really openly angry at him or anything, but he just was no good. That's all there was to him. Here he was, tech sergeant in charge of S4. But anyway, I was looking for the S4, and somebody had given me directions, and I got in this building. It was supposed to be the first door on the left. I went in at the first door on the left, and there was a fellow sitting with, he had a uniform on. It was not Sergeant Shoemate, because I knew him. But I figured, what the heck, he looked like he was somebody. He didn't have any marking, no stripes, no rank, anything on. And I started in on him. And he says, he listened to me. He really did. And I got all through it. He says, he wrote something on paper and folded it over, wrote my name on the outside. He says, you find this man and tell him your story and you'll get your shoes. And I found the man and he says, you been to see General Allan? I says, not that I know of. I sure wished I'd known then that he was an Aggie.
I didn't know that. Allan was an Aggie?
You bet. You bet. In fact, I started a movement, not to undercut you or anything, but I wanted the museum at A&M because Allan was an Aggie, but it didn't ever happen. But anyway, I got my shoes. Took them back, and Herb was so surprised he didn't know what to do. I never did tell him about how I got them.
What happened to the note? Did the guy keep it?
Oh, yeah.
It's too bad you didn't.
I know. I should have kept it.
Well, once the division starts on the offensive, what's the 134th doing? What are you doing?
Well, I tell you, that's when I had an opportunity to volunteer to become an ammunition hauler, because part of the 12th had been committed, some of the artillery, and I thought, well, shoot, this sounds like a pretty good duty. I can go see some country, and I could. From Epinal, I went way up to, what's the name of that darn town right on the border? Oh, shoot, I can't remember without a map. But anyway, it was quite a stronghold of the Germans, and there was a company or a battalion it was a company, or maybe two companies of the battalion, one of the artillery battalions. They were shooting, and they used up artillery. Boy, did they ever. They'd use a truckload a day. You can get a lot of 105s, 155s on the back of a truck. And I know one time, a fella told me, he says, well, on the way back, why don't you drop over through Nancy, and there's a little restaurant. He gave me directions. He said, all you got to do is go in there and say manger. And boy, he says, they'll get you a meal, steaks, and the whole bit. Well, what the heck? That sounded good to me. I did. And I got a full steak meal with coffee afterward, the whole thing, and I'll bet it didn't cost me 50 cents American. That was amazing. I tried to make it a habit of going back there, too. But really, that volunteering was good because I did get to see an awful lot of France. And I put this in that other thing that you've got, the paper. But anyway, you know, in those towns in Lorraine, and Alsace too, but mostly in Lorraine because it's farm country, the farmers all live in little towns and they farm the area around it, you know. It's like in Germany, they do that too. But the farmer with the biggest manure pile in front of his house, he's the wealthiest. There is no question. He is the wealthiest one in town because he's got the most livestock. And, you know, my dad was second generation German. His father's, he's third generation. His father's father came from Germany. And I spoke a little German. I could count to 10 and stuff like that in German. And, of course, they give us little language books to learn from, and I got so I could get along, I thought. But one day we had to ask directions, and Herb didn't know from up in German. He says, find out. So I did. It really surprised me that I could. It was fun.
Now, almost from the beginning you were running the ammunition runs?
Oh, I was on the ammunition detail for about 2 weeks, and then we moved, and I forgot exactly. But it seemed like every chance I got to leave the camp, I took it because it was heck, I saw countryside.
What were you aware of what the rest of the 134th was doing, how that was set up in terms of supporting the front lines?
Not really. We weren't briefed that well as to where we were other than what town we were in, because we all knew that anyhow. But where it was in relationship to elsewhere, I guess they figured we didn't need to know. Now, at one time, I don't remember how I did it, but I got a map of France that was done for the Signal Corps, and it was a good map. And after I got that map, I knew where I was, you know, with relation to everybody else. But not of the division, because I had no idea.
Well, what about like A Company, your company? What kinds of things was your company doing to support the front line?
Everything we could. We always had one or more tanks in there for repair. Engines gone, or they had to change an engine or something like that. And there's other vehicles that came in for repair. And, you know, it was actually a kind of a contest between these maintenance crews who could change a tank engine the fastest. It got so, I think, that one of the crews in A Company was the champion of the ETO. I don't know that positively, but they always claimed that.
What about you? Did you have any trouble getting parts for them?
That's the other thing. Lots of times I'd have to go back to Epinal and get parts, or, you know, go somewhere else and bring them in, that kind of thing, and then take parts sometimes to the tank crew out in the field, because they couldn't even move the tank. Sometimes they couldn't even get it so that they could get it onto a tank transporter. Have you ever seen one of those things?
I've seen photographs of it.
I tell you, they are tremendous vehicles. Golly, they could carry 2 medium tanks and 3 light tanks. And, oh, you talk about a load. Ooh.
What about tanks that were battle damaged?
Mostly if they were battle damaged to the degree they couldn't be moved, they were left there.
Didn't scavenge parts or anything?
It seemed as though if it was at all possible, they did. They salvaged what they could.
So if you were to characterize the months of combat, the Company A actually sort of floated behind the front line as they went.
That's right.
You all were constantly on the move too?
Well, we were, you say constantly, we would stay probably 4 days to a week and a half in a particular town. And then we would be sent somewhere else. One time we got sent to the wrong place. And everybody in the camp, everybody in A Company stood guard duty that night because the Krauts were only 100 yards away and they didn't know that we were there. And we were glad they didn't know.
You remember where that was?
Not really. I have tried and tried to remember where that was, and I swear I don't. But I don't know if I could talk to some boys. They could help me, and together we could do it.
Could you, if you were asked to, sit down and actually write out a listing, chronology of dates where you were and take you from, say, December 1 through the end of the war? In other words, Company A.
No, they warned us at the time we were over there that we should not keep a diary. Now, some of the boys did, but I didn't because I was scared that they meant it. They may have meant it, but they didn't really mean it. But I wish I had, because then I could do that. Now, it's just too fuzzy.
Are you aware of anyone in your company or your battalion that kept a diary or has copies of the after-action reports?
No, I'm afraid not.
Anything else you can tell us about the combat period from your perspective? Anything unusual happen or people that you remember from that period that stand out in your mind?
Oh, let's see.
We realize you're not going to be able to top the General Allan story.
Probably not. Come close, though. No, one time, after we got with Patton, we were assigned to Patton to be his lead division when we crossed the Rhine, spearhead. And then we left France, went up through Luxembourg, and actually, I believe, I'm almost positive, it was in Luxembourg, or it was over in the falls. Luxembourg's pretty small anyway. That the kitchen ran out of water and their truck was in for maintenance, and They had to have water, so I volunteered by request to go get some water. Now they showed me a map with water point marked on it, WP, and I went to get some water for them. I took a guy from the kitchen along. He'd never been there, but he was going to load the water. And we get to this little place where the water point is, and every one of those towns really looks the same. You come around the corner and there's a Platz, and there's a big water fountain in the middle of the Platz, a square really. And you know that's the water point, that's all there's to it. And that's where we're going to get the water. Well, we turned the corner and started toward the water fountain, and I looked straight ahead and, hey, those ain't GIs. They were Germans. There was a whole squad of them over there, and I didn't like the looks of that. There were just two of us, and all we had was little M30 carbines, and they're not much. So I backed that truck around and took off. Now, they shot at us.
They didn't follow you?
No, they were on foot.
Oh.
No, they shot at us, broke the back window of the truck, and it was an open truck. There was no door. But they did, when we were going toward them, one shot hit the rack right beside my door. But anyway, when we were leaving, a couple bullets went through the partition behind us. You know, it was a metal partition, but not very thick. And I got a couple of bullet holes in my sleeve of my field jacket. I got a new field jacket because I issued it to me. That was battle one. Huh?
Should have kept the old one, though.
Oh, I didn't want any part of that one. No, they had two styles of field jacket. Are you aware of that? One of them was that green, kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, kind of almost like a denim, only it's smoother. And another one was a much neater looking jacket. It fastened around the waistline, and it had a zipper on it rather than buttons like the green field jacket. I got me one of that. But I got back to the kitchen and I told, what the heck was the kitchen's name? The cook, the mess sergeant. I forgot the mess sergeant's name then. Anyway, he didn't last much longer. I knew some of the boys in the mess hall. Denton.
What happened to the
mess sergeant?
Yeah.
He was transferred. He wasn't very well liked anyway. But I told him, I says, I just don't believe you're going to get any water today, and besides which I've got a canteen full and don't need it. And I turned around and let Mickey tell him all about it. Mickey Lane, his name was, that went with me. Now, Mickey Lane was a permanent KP. In our outfit during combat, everybody would throw $1 a month in a pot, and we'd had enough permanent KPs, and they got, I don't know, they got money out of that, what we threw in the pot, over and above their pay from the service. But we didn't care, $1 a month, that's kept us out of KP.
Amen.
Oh boy.
Well, anything else you can think of to add during the combat period?
Well, combat lasted till we got, or speaking of myself, I was taking some parts to a bunch that were already in Austria, and this was way south of Munich, where where A Company was at the time. So I drove, God, it was a long way, it seemed like, because, you know, when you're driving in the Alps, it's like driving in the Rocky Mountains. There's so many switchbacks and whatnot that they all count as mileage, you know, but you don't go very far that way. But I finally got down there, and I spent the night down there because it got later than I thought, but I got the parts to the outfit. There's a tank battalion down there.
It was, I think that was the 23rd, wasn't it?
I think so, but I've forgotten it right now. But anyway, I spent the night. The next morning after breakfast and coffee, it was announced the war was over. And I went home. I mean, I went back to the outfit as quick as I could before they could find something else for me to do. Because I figured it wouldn't be any time at all before I would go home, but it was longer than that.
What happened after that for you?
I went with A Company. We were stationed at a little town called Laukheim. And that was a very interesting town.
Now, was that occupation duty?
Well, not really. We had police duty. Well, I guess you'd call it occupation. We were in charge of the security for the entire area for General Patch, 7th Army. He assigned the 12th Armored as the security division. And yeah, and in that sense we were, now Laukheim was a nice place. And the best part of Laukheim was, we had a swimming pool. And there was a big high mountain, at least a real large hill, to the south and a little west of town. And on top of that hill there was what they called the Kopfenberger. Now that was a castle. That was a big castle. It looked for all the world like one of those old medieval castles, you know. And it was large enough. When I first got there, when I first discovered it, there must have been 1,000 people living in that castle. The DPs and ex-German soldiers and trying to get home one way or another. It was quite a hodgepodge of people. And talked to some of those people up there, because I could speak a little German, and this fellow that was with me, he could speak some too, and we got along pretty well. But anyway, this one guy we talked to, he talked like whatever he said was the law when he was talking to some of the people there. And it kind of struck us wrong, so I went back and reported to Captain O'Connor that it just something not right up there. I couldn't put my finger on it, and he reported to division, and first thing you know, we had a bunch of MPs come up, because we didn't have enough personnel to have, they wanted 16 on guard with 4 on and 4 off around the clock. And we didn't have enough personnel, so they sent up that many MPs, and they ended up catching, I've forgotten exactly, but I know it was more than 4 SS people, and turned them over to the war crimes people, which is not bad. No, we had a supply sergeant then who spoke fluent German. He was from a town in Wisconsin near Green Bay called St. Nanciance. And he knew that some of the boys, when we crossed the Rhine, they had been looting. That's what we called it when we picked up stuff, you looting. Anyway, he got those guys and talked to them like the old LBJ used to do, you know, heart to heart. And he got them to turn over most of the money that they had looted from this train. It was German Army payroll. They had a bunch. I mean, a big bunch. They got to turn over to him, and he used that money. He opened up the bakery and the, meat market, and down the road there was a little town called Allan, and he opened the ice cream factory down there. We had the finest mess anywhere around. The general used to come up to eat supper with us every night. He was in Heidenheim.
And who was this mess sergeant that did that?
C.J. Miller.
And what company was he in? Was he,
A.
He was in your company?
He was always in A company. When he went over there, we went overseas and in combat first, he was Lieutenant Burns, peep driver, who Burns was assigned to liaison. And after they lost 2 peeps, CJ decided the better part of valor was to get another job. Now, he never got Purple Heart or anything, but they lost 2 Jeeps. He says, I know how those guys in the old armies used to feel when they got their horse shot out in winter.
Well, have you seen him since the war?
Oh, yeah, I've seen CJ. Last time I saw him personally, let's see, I forget which reunion it was, but the first time I saw him after the war was at a reunion in Milwaukee. And there's a place in Milwaukee, what the heck is it called? It's still there, too. There's a German place. They have good music. Maders, M-A-D-E-R-S, Maders. And he bought us, everybody that was around us, he bought our lunch for us that day. It must have cost him $200 because there was a pile of us. Oh, yeah, this Lieutenant Burns, he was the guy that always promised that after the war he was going to invite everybody to his home in Pennsylvania free of charge, pay their transportation, everything, because he says they've saved me many, many times. That never happened, though.
Never saw him again, huh?
No, never did.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add to the combat period before we just briefly talk about going home, the point system and that?
You know, one of the goriest things I ever saw was when we actually crossed the Rhine at Worms. We ran over bodies. It was terrible. I mean, I've never been through anything like that before or since, I'm sure. It was bad.
Was it German or American?
German. Because they'd had a saturation bombing the night before, the American Air Force. And it really did. It was almost a firestorm.
This was on the other side of the river?
Yeah, see, Worms is on the German side. There's no town on the west side. But that was that was all I wanted to see, I'll tell you. No, the only one time I ever got shot at was that one time getting water, and outside of that crossing the river, I really didn't know much about combat.
Didn't see anything of the death camps or anything?
Oh, actually, we saw one down by Augsburg, Landsberg. I think it was Landsberg. Anyway, some of our boys liberated the camp. I say liberated. The SS guards had already left. They went and unlocked a bunch of doors, and I can still see some of those prisoners or whatever, PO, well, whatever they called them. They were almost scarecrows. They were out cavorting around in the street. It was not very pleasant, and I'm glad we had to just keep going. That was our orders anyway. We had to keep going.
So you actually got to see them.
There was a medical division, or a big medical battalion that we knew was on the way there to take care of the situation, and they did, I guess.
It wasn't the 82nd from
No,
your
it
division.
wasn't the 12th Division that I know of. Well, some of them may have done some work there, but there was a special medical detachment on their way there.
Anything else you'd like to add?
No, it's not necessary. I can't think of anything.
When the war was over, how many points did you have? Were you able to?
You know, I don't remember the exact amount, but I know I had enough to go home. But I was not amongst the first. Well, the fact is, I had to help close out the whole 12th Armored, because I was one of the boys that knew how to fill out the proper forms. And we hauled, I forget how many loads, over to a big dump near Ulm. A fellow that was the secretary for the 12th Association for years, because they couldn't get anybody else to be, Harold Hendricks. He was working for me in Company Supply at the time, and we just had a ball. We lived in what they called the King's Row in Heidenheim then, and I had a fine bedroom, larger than this, all to myself, and it was great. And the house had a garage in the basement. The driveway just drove right in, you know. And that was my supply room. And it was a fine place to work out of. The best one I had the whole time we were overseas.
Well, when did you finally get to go home?
Let's see. I left the 12th Armored about a month after the 12th Association was formed. And that was in October, I believe. About a month later, I went to the 2nd Armored, and it was up, anyway, it was north of Frankfurt, and at a place called Idstein. And I went to the thing is, I don't remember. It was the maintenance battalion of the 2nd Armored, but I don't know the number of it. But I was in B Company of that battalion, and I was a supply sergeant for them because their supply sergeant had gone home. And let's see, I had been made a T4, technician 4th grade, before I left, and they'd considered that enough. They didn't give me staff stripe, but that was all right with me. I was going home. But anyway, after we were only at Idstein for about a month, and we moved back east of Frankfurt to a town called Wächtersbach. And that was a real interesting place. We stayed at Wächtersbach until the day after Christmas. But Wächtersbach, in fact, is 2 of the boys, I didn't know either of them very well, they married girls from that town and stayed over there.
Wow.
Yeah, no fooling. I'll have to admit that both the girls spoke fluent English, and they were real nice girls, really. Real pretty, and they spoke fluent English. And one of them typed the words to a song that Bing Crosby made a record of it, only not in German. He made a record of it in English, and I heard it after the war, and in English it was "I'll Be Yours," if you ever remember hearing that. And over there it was called Come Back. And she typed me out the words, and the other day I was cleaning out a briefcase, and there was those funny little scraps of paper, and that's what it was.
My goodness.
It was something else. But, and where I lived was in a house, a large house, where the leading citizen of Wächtersbach lived, and she was a countess. Countess von Wächtersbach. And her husband had been a general in the German army long before the war, and he'd died a long time previous. She was in her late 80s at the time, but she was a full-fledged countess. They called it Grafine. A count was a Graf. But that was an interesting thing. Then we found out we were going to go, so we got on trucks the day after Christmas and went back through Frankfurt and across the falls to Kaiserslautern, and then we turned south and went back down through Severn and Sellerstadt, and then we didn't go through what was the name of that? The Colmar, but we got on a train. No, I'm sorry, we stayed on trucks all the way to Marseille. We spent about a week on the beach of Marseille, more than a week, about 3 weeks. And I got a pass to go to Nice for New Year's. And that was an interesting, it was fun. On Saturday afternoon, I rented a bicycle and drove over to Monte Carlo, rode over to Monte Carlo, and went into the big casino just because I wanted to. I didn't stay there very long because I was way out of my element there. But that was, and there was a casino right there at Nice, too. I stayed at the Negresco Hotel, which is a real fine hotel, right on the waterfront. But I can't remember the name of the casino. It was right there. I just stepped inside the door there, too. Heck, I couldn't afford to gamble.
When did you get back to the United States?
We got back to the United States February the 20th, I believe. We left...
That's 46?
46, yes.
And when were you discharged?
About 3 days later, 4, something like that. Got on a train and went to Fort Sheridan and was discharged from there, and they gave me travel money to where I had been inducted, which was Rockford, which was not even halfway home, but that was all right. Gave me all the back pay I had coming, and I had 2 or 3 months coming.
Well, thank you very much for the interview.
All right. I didn't mean to drag it out.
That's fine. It was great.